Never in history before or since has a war been fought with such massive aviation air power on all sides as was waged during World War II. Just the United States alone manufactured over 324,000 aircraft by the war's end, and the U.S. entered the war late compared to the rest of the world in the early months of 1942, because at the time Europe had already been at war for over 3 years. The total number of worldwide aircraft manufactured was over 800,000 planes. However, we will never see the likes of such a global event on the scale of World War II ever again, because one seminal event towards the end of the war saw the creation of a new superweapon, and with that creation in an instant it changed warfare forever. And of course, as most of you know, at least I hope you do, the creation of the new superweapon, the atomic bomb, at the time was the result of the United States secret mission to build the bomb codenamed the Manhattan Project. At a cost of $2.2 billion in 1945 money, today that's equivalent to about $35 billion. The project was so secret that U.S. Vice President Harry Truman wasn't even made aware of it until he became president upon the death of then U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt. However, in 1945, the U.S. was in a race against time because Nazi Germany had already been in the early stages of designing and developing an atomic bomb, and there was no way the Allies could let the Axis powers get hold of such an existential world-altering device. As a matter of fact, many of the scientists who worked on the Manhattan Project came to the U.S. while fleeing the war in Europe, including possibly a Russian spy or two as well, which may have aided in the Soviet Union's speedy development of their own bomb after the U.S. put the program on display for the world to see. But that's a story for a different video. But let's face it, the United States along with its European and global allies around the world were the good guys in this particular war. And like I said, if Hitler got a hold of such a device, many of us would not be here watching YouTube today. But as tragic, terrifying, and devastating as nuclear weapons are, they indeed brought a speedy conclusion to what would have been a very costly invasion of mainland Japan, with well over 1 million U.S. soldiers lost on the U.S. side alone. But not only that, but by ending the war decisively, especially after the defeat and surrender of Germany, it finally brought peace back to the world for decades after. And of course, there hasn't been a world war since. And mostly that's because since 1945, unfortunately, the world has been living under a cloud of fear of global annihilation ever since the first nuclear bomb was tested in the New Mexico desert on July 16, 1945. And as of today, 9 countries, the United States, Russia, China, the United Kingdom, France, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea all have nuclear weapons. And as terrifying as that is, so far at least, the world has managed to keep their nuclear weapons holstered. And there's another tidbit I need to mention, pun intended, about the first atomic bomb. The dropping of the atomic bomb on Japan in 1945 made United States Colonel Paul Tibbets and his mother Enola Tibbets household names around the globe ever since. Because it was Colonel Paul Tibbets and the crew of his Boeing B-29 Superfortress bomber, he named after his mother, the Enola Gay, that dropped the first atomic bomb in history over Hiroshima, Japan on the morning of August 6, 1945. And while hundreds of thousands of lives were indeed lost in Japan, it was this new and terrifying weapon that saved millions of Allied servicemen from certain slaughter of an invasion of Japan. So unless you've been living in a cave somewhere, you know that this month award-winning director and producer Christopher Nolan has made a movie about the Manhattan Project, specifically featuring the brains behind the bomb, J. Robert Oppenheimer. The movie is simply called Oppenheimer, and it's being released to the world this month. And from all accounts, his IMAX movie is a historic masterpiece that has received breathtakingly rave reviews from thousands of film critics around the world that have already seen it. And I gotta be honest, I can't remember the last time I actually went to the theater to see a movie, but I might actually have to pony up the cash to see this one. It looks pretty good. Okay, so now we get to the point of this particular video because it is about a rare interview with the real J. Robert Oppenheimer in 1965. And while I know many of you who are a certain age know a lot about the Manhattan Project and Robert Oppenheimer already, for those of you who may not, especially those younger subscribers out there, I wanted to show you this interview so maybe before you see the movie of Robert Oppenheimer, you can get a feel for who the actual man was and what his personal thoughts were on how the creation and dropping of the atomic bomb affected him as well as the other scientists and physicists personally. The interview is only 5 minutes long, so you really don't want to skim through it and miss anything. It was part of a much larger interview, but please be sure to pay special attention to the final minute of this interview, when Oppenheimer lays bare the truth of what was truly a necessary weapon at the time, but also at the time no one seemed to understand that once they let the nuclear genie out of the bottle, there was no putting it back in. You know, this interview was so emotional and thought-provoking in 1965 when it first aired that it went viral before viral was even a thing. So without further ado, here is J. Robert Oppenheimer's historic and moving interview. I'll be back after the interview to give you some of my thoughts as well.
I remember that we first responded to the question, what do scientists think, by saying that they think a variety of things and this is only natural. On the one hand, they hoped that this instrument would never be used in war, and therefore they hoped that we would not start out by using it. On the other hand, they hoped, or other people hoped, that it would put an end to this war, save countless lives, put an end to a butchery that had been going on for many years and had been marked by atrocities, concentration camps, murderous raids on cities, Rotterdam and Dresden and Tokyo itself. You ask yourself, would the Japanese government, as then constituted, and with the bitter division between the peace party and the war party, would it have been influenced by an enormous nuclear firecracker detonated at great height, doing little damage? And your answer is as good as mine. I don't know. I know only that I was told that an invasion was planned, that it would be necessary, and that it would be terribly costly.
Alamogordo, New Mexico. At the bomb test site, the scientists are working under growing pressure. They are told there must be no further delays. The president must know the results of the test when he meets with Stalin. In mid-July, a car arrives at the test site. In the back seat is the plutonium for the bomb. It is 48 hours before H hour at ground zero. Sunday, July 15, 1945, Alamogordo, New Mexico. It is D-1 for the test of the world's first atomic device. In the bunkers, the scientists and the generals wait. No one is quite sure that the $2 billion device they call the gadget will work. The weather is checked. Preparations continue. The scientists make up a pool on the power of the device. Fermi suggests it may blow up New Mexico. As the waiting goes on, the tension increases.
My hands were on the switch, and then I could hear the timer counting 3, 2, 1. All of a sudden, an incredible flash of light illuminated everything many times brighter than sunlight does in New Mexico at noon on a bright day. Many miles of the desert were completely blinding, and so I actually lost my vision for a few seconds. When it recovered, I turned back and I saw a huge ball of fire, bright yellow, rising through the atmosphere, and the whole atmosphere in the direction of the bomb was filled with strange violet light. It was one of the most aesthetically beautiful things I've ever seen. On an enormous scale, this cloud was peach, pink, purple. We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Now I have become death, the destroyer of worlds. Wow. The first time the world heard Oppenheimer utter those words, it sent chills across the globe. And you can see how conflicted he was during the process of the Manhattan Project. Many of the scientists and physicists that worked on the project weren't exactly happy about it, yet they weren't forced to do it either. But to a man, they knew it had to be done to save the world at the time, so some of them held their noses and did it. But also there were many who were quite patriotic and in favor of the project, as well as they, along with the rest of the world, were looking for a way by any means necessary to end the war, to end all wars. And finally, for such an intelligent man, sadly he wasn't too bright about everything, because he died a young man not due to radiation exposure, but Oppenheimer was a chain smoker, and he was diagnosed with throat cancer in late 1965. If you listen closely to the interview, you can actually hear his labored breathing. After inconclusive surgery, he underwent unsuccessful radiation treatment and chemotherapy in late 1966. He fell into a coma on February 15, 1967, and died at his home in Princeton, New Jersey on February 18, at the age of 62. Oh, spoiler alert. Sorry about that. Yeah, he died. So like I said, I'm stoked about this movie, and I'm also stoked to hear what you have to say. So let me know down below. Well, as always, I want to thank you for dropping in and joining me here at Maximus Aviation, and if you think I deserve it, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that subscribe button and do all those other things YouTube wants you to do. But until next time, remember, leave the rubber on the runway and your troubles on the ground. And I will see you next time in the air. Yeah, this is Maximus.